Please come out. Don't do it.
Let's face it, sometimes crushing it in business, even feeling confident in business, is tough.
I'm winning. I am on top of the world. And when things are not going my way, I feel like a loser.
Yeah, baby. So welcome back to another episode of the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. I am Chris Niemeyer, here with my friends Christopher McCluskey, Jamie Slingerland, and Michael McGreevy. We are just four guys who are crazy about our wives. We love our kids, and we want to crush it in business. And we have these kind of conversations each week to just move us along in those domains. And we go on these cycles. Maybe we call it a yo-yo. It's our self-confidence yo-yo, where sometimes we put so much of our self-worth and our value into how we're doing or how we're not doing. And so today we just want to explore this because, let's face it, as guys, this is probably on our mind just about every day, or at least every week. Michael, I want to start with you because this is a conversation we've been having, the four of us, in just how do we attack, how do we address this idea of a self-confidence yo-yo?
No, you're starting with me. This is such an area of, I don't know if I want to call it shame, but I'm almost embarrassed to have this conversation, but I can't be the only one here that feels this way.
But you are not.
When I am not doing well, especially in business, when I don't feel like I've had a couple wins in a while, I feel so weak and so incompetent. My business is going nowhere. On the other side of that coin, if things are going well and I land a couple clients in a row, I think I'm bulletproof. I'm unstoppable, and I'm God's gift to coaching. I'm embarrassed about this, but often my confidence level just rises and falls based on how I'm doing. I think there's something a little bit deeper here because I've talked to a lot of guys, and I think some other people are feeling this too.
Michael, thank God that you don't have the metrics that I have with my Amazon business. I can go in there and look at today, last year, during the hours of noon to 5 and say, holy crap, my sales are down 5,000% from last year during this time block. I live in that space. Admittedly, I have the same shame or frustration of feeling self-worth. And I mean, right before we jumped on to record this, I was feeling shame and self-worth for my audio quality, for Pete's sake. So, I mean, it can happen in any... McCluskey, you were supposed to laugh at that when I was trying to be funny.
I'm laughing on the inside, Jamie. Always laughing on the inside.
It is true, though. We get stuck in our heads feeling sorry for ourselves because we don't have a perspective of what's really going on in the big picture. It's like that microcosm of, oh, this week I'm doing crappy. And let's face it, as an entrepreneur, that's just what we signed up for. We're not expecting to have consistency every single week, or at least we expect it, but we're idiots for doing so, right?
You said something key there too, and we get stuck in our head. This is really an internal talk, an internal discussion we have on our self-confidence. Chris, how do you identify that, number one, and then how do you address that?
Well, I identify it first, like Michael, very reluctantly, and it's hard to come face to face with yourself and recognize yet again, am I seriously this shallow, or am I seriously this connected with my self-worth, who I am, and what I do? It's not that I did something bad or wrong or sinful and I should be ashamed and I should go and repent because I got to apologize to somebody. No, I'm just out there still trying to do it in business, and it's not paying off yet. The money's not coming in, and suddenly I feel like I'm just a slug, not worthy of, taking up any more of your air. And then on the flip side, things finally start to pay off and come together. And of course we're going to celebrate and we're fist pumping. But like Michael said, you suddenly start thinking like, hey, I think I got this thing figured out now. Maybe I am kind of bulletproof. And you just go, gosh, seriously? I think it's important for us just to acknowledge that this is not something that I think is unique to any individual or certain people who are only at a certain space in life. I think it's a universal that we're talking about. That internal dialogue, a lot more often than we would like to admit, comes down to our self-worth being tied to what have we done and what are the fruits that we can see right now. It's just a critical place for us to continually hit our knees and come before the Lord in repentance over and asking for a different perspective. I'm not sure that we can just yank ourselves out of that.
Oh, well, gosh, this isn't just limited to our businesses, right? We have our marriages, how we're doing there, how much our kids like us, being wrapped up into that. My son is just like not listening to what I'm telling him to do. What kind of father am I? And then on the other end of the spectrum, oh yeah, me and Gunnar went out and had this awesome time together on his birthday. He told me he loved me. I'm an amazing dad. There's other realms of life, and these EFM realms, this shows up everywhere. I think really the question we have is, am I a real man? Am I a godly man in these areas? And that's what gets questioned.
I just flashed on an image from a movie. I don't know that it's one we want to recommend necessarily, but you remember Parenthood? Steve Martin was the dad in it with a group of kids. One of his boys had a propensity toward anxiety, and he was just like probably 9 or 10 years old, but the kid was getting real stressed out. And they flashed this image of like what's going on inside of Steve Martin's mind as a dad. His kid is an adult on the college campus. He's holed up in the bell tower of one of the main buildings on campus. He's got a gun with him, and he's firing, and they're down there with bullhorns going, please come out, don't do it. He's like, my dad was such an awful dad. He's down there, but I love you, son. Oh, man, can we go to bad places in our mind about how we're performing? How am I doing as a dad, as a husband, as a business owner? Everything that EFM is about. May not be our kids in bell towers with guns, but it's something akin to that.
Yeah, we're going to screw him up somehow. Hopefully it's not as bad as that movie, McCluskey.
I like what John Eldredge says in this space. He talks a lot about how men find your validation. I think the default, for me anyway, without thinking about it, I find my validation in how I'm doing with my business, how happy my wife is, and how much my kids like me. If I don't think about it, that's where I naturally go. And I know that is fleeting because my kids are going to be up and down. My wife is going to have hard days. And my business is going to have good days and hard days too. So in a way, I'm setting myself up for a roller coaster, just getting thrown all over the place by however these things just happen to be behaving or acting on any given day.
So Michael, help us out, man. That's a good point. As EFM kind of guys, we default to looking at our marriage, our kids, our business, how it's going. Where's the best metric to look at? What do we really need to focus on that puts those to the side?
I'm learning right along with everybody on this subject. I mean, my word for 2019 is abide. And that's what this is all about for me. Instead of looking at those areas of my life and saying, I'm worth it, or I'm valuable, or I'm a man because of how these things are going, I'm learning how to find that validation in my Heavenly Father. And I wish I had an answer for you here, but this is a process and a journey for me. All that I know is that when I am walking with Him, I have strength that is not fleeting. It doesn't rise and fall with how things happen to be going. It's steady, it's solid, and it's lasting.
That's good.
That word is one we've talked about on here because you had shared it as being your word for the year. And abide is such an unusual word. It's more of a state of being than it is any kind of a specific action that we're to take. There's things we can do that would aid us in abiding in the presence of the Lord, and there are things that will distract us so that we're not abiding well. But it doesn't necessarily tell us what to do in order to abide. It's more a state that we get into. I will share here that my life verse is from a strange book. Most people probably don't pull their life verses from Ecclesiastes because it's a pretty depressing book for the most part. It's one of those wisdom literature books. It's attributed to Solomon, and it's an examination of life. And we're familiar at least with some of the phrases that repeat throughout it. This is the one where we get there's a time and a season for everything under the sun, but it's also where we get vanity, vanity, all is vanity, a mere chasing after the wind. And it talks a lot about the pointlessness of a lot of the things that we pursue or that we try to do in life to fill up this space. But if you study the book as a whole and read through it, like ideally in a sitting, and then come back to it and maybe just pick it as your book to camp out on for a week and read the entire thing. It's only like 11 chapters or so. Read the entire thing every day. You see that throughout the heavy, morose, existential examination of why is anything in life worth anything, there are these moments that are like lightning bolts that come through where it'll say, but then I realized, and you better read quickly because it's only going to be like a couple of sentences, and then it'll go right back to the morbid contemplation of life. But those little lightning bolts are actually, I would suggest, the main theme of the book. So here's my life verse, because it's one of those little lightning bolts. It's only 3 verses long. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 18 through 20. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given him. For this is his lot. Okay, that's the first verse. I love that it's like this 4 punches in a row. Boom, 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 boom. Like, seriously, I get it. You're going to work your butt off and then you're going to die. Okay? You're going to
toilsome and short.
Yeah, you're going to eat, you're going to drink, you're going to find satisfaction. In what? In your toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God's given you, because that's your lot.
Chris, I was with you with eat, drink, and satisfaction. Then I lost you.
Right there. Yeah, that's just the A part of that verse, not the B.
Here's verse 19. It says, moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them. There's a comma on either side of that portion of the sentence. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions, comma, and enables him to enjoy them. Where does the ability come from? From God, like the wealth came from God. When God gives those things, and then he even goes further, there's another comma, and it clarifies, what does he mean by that? Enables him to enjoy them. That is, to accept his lot in life and to be happy in his work. This is a gift of God. And then the final verse is this one. That man seldom reflects on the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. There's a state of being, a state of gladness of heart, irrespective of circumstance, up or down, money's coming in or not, feeling good about me or not. There's a gladness of heart that's a gift from the Lord when we are abiding in him, eyes on him, because, everything else is a lot of chasing after the wind. It's a pretty powerful verse.
Wow, I feel like I need some time to let that really sink in and reflect on that. Awesome.
Yeah, we're having some church up in here. That was good. I need to sit with that one too. But boy, just that idea of gladness of heart, and I've never heard that before, Chris, when you talked about just the fact that he is the one that enables us, right? So many times, and it's so easy in our culture to go in this comparison route of his business is doing X, there's an extra comma in that one, or he's got this, and we can always compare. In fact, I'm even thinking of the story of Henry Ford, richest guy in the world at the time, and he was asked by a reporter, Mr. Ford, how much money is enough? And he turns to him simply and says, just a little bit more.
Oh.
And it was like, man, here's the richest guy in the world. Can you imagine not having that enablement that the Lord gives to us to just enjoy what we're doing, who we're doing it for? So I know this whole thing of abiding, Michael, has really challenged me to just be. I am admittedly much more of a human doing than a human being at times. And it's just being on this journey with you guys. In fact, that's one thing I want to talk about in this idea of abiding. What are some ways that we can abide?
I want to jump in here because it goes back to what McCluskey was saying and what you were saying about Henry Ford. I think it's the accepting part. That was the key word that I took out of there, McCluskey. Mm-hmm. Accepting the lot in life. Again, with McGreevy's word for this year, for 2019, that word abide, I've seen him accept it. And he said no to the epic trip that we did. And I still saw gladness in his spirit, even though he missed out on that. He had that FOMO. He didn't go with us. And when I talked to him, I felt like he's all been an example in front of us of accepting that word. He's abided with the Lord, and he's bearing much fruit in the sense of having gladness in his heart because of it. And Henry Ford lacked that. And when I hear that scripture, McCluskey, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the Enneagram people think that Solomon was a 7.
700 wives.
Oh, man. How many wives is enough? One more, maybe. I don't know. Maybe Henry Ford was too. That's definitely like a posture that 3 of us have, that God is calling us into this acceptance of what he has for us in our family. You know what? He's given us so much goodness. Yet if you're like me, it's really easy to sort of be like, I want more. Like last week on the podcast, right, McCluskey? My precious.
Man, Jamie, I love that you grabbed that one word there, acceptance, because you're right. It's directly connected to the statement that precedes it about being God giving the person the ability to enjoy. That is to accept. The two equate there. And I'm thinking like Paul in the New Testament, when he's writing about his struggles with his thorn in the flesh. And it's not that he got a point of acceptance where he's like, okay, I surrender, I give. I guess it's okay, Lord, you'll give me the grace. He says, no, I will therefore rejoice in my weakness. Not rejoice that God's greater than my weakness. It's the weakness itself I'm going to embrace. And that's a different way of thinking about accept. Accept sounds kind of like surrender, like passive. Well, okay, I just gotta accept this lot. That sounds too passive for an entrepreneur. But accept like how Christ accepted, embraced the cross. When we willingly move toward the struggles, the toilsome labors, the sufferings, my illness and all, when people ask me, how am I with the illness? I'd still love it if the Lord take it away from me, but I've walked toward it and I say, I rejoice in this. I'm a different man than I would have been. That kind of acceptance is very different from a settling for. Get used to it, pal. Just accept it. I don't think that's what it's talking about at all.
McCluskey, I struggle with the either or thinking that if I accept my lot in life, then I can't have a hungry spirit. So I think for me personally, it has to do with accepting my lot in life and being grateful to everything that God's given me, but not being complacent. To hold those two postures at the same time seems really difficult for me because I have this either or mindset. I'm either going to be hungry and looking for the next thing, or I'm going to be lethargic and complacent and accepting. And I think what God would have us do is be super grateful and joyful, and at the same time be looking for an opportunity and not be in that scarcity mindset of either or, because how's it worked out for us so far, right?
Embracing it. Jamie, you have a phrase you use all the time. I receive it. That's what that acceptance. I accept the gift. I receive the gift. I embrace the gift of whatever my lot in life is. I'm an entrepreneur, and thanks be to God, I'm also a husband and a father. I receive those. I embrace those.
I receive it.
And I think, Jamie, you said another word there in terms of just being grateful. There's something that you guys were talking about and bantering back and forth there about, oh, well, this is just my lot. And that's a whole different attitude than this is what's happening. Maybe I don't love it, but I know that I'm learning through it and I'm growing through this. So there's a gratefulness of heart that happens, kind of that attitude of gratitude that we talk about.
Yep. Something's
going on here. I'm going to be thankful for it because I know that there's going to be learning through the process, growth on the other side.
Absolutely. It almost feels like, okay, I'm submitting to the pain that was coming for me for a while. It's kind of like a little twisted lie that if you submit to what God has for you, then you're going to be in this place of punishment and sacrifice from here on out. When really, what are you submitting to? It's better things. It's
joy.
It's community with God and the people around you. It's greater opportunities, greater success. It's just everything that you really want comes in that submission. And that's what I'm starting to see is abide is not you getting nailed to the stake before you get sacrificed. It's actually a big, fat step forward. And I'm starting to see that now for the first time ever.
Yeah, Michael, that reminds me, again, we're having church up in here, so I'm just keeping up with the theme. That scripture in Hebrews where it talks about no pain is pleasant, but it creates a harvest of righteousness by those that are trained. it's oftentimes something that is seemingly like a new a straitjacket can be the thing that is the biggest blessing from God, because it creates more freedom later on and more joy and more peace. So that's really good.
I'll insert one thought here because I'm already anticipating some posts from some of our listeners who pay very close attention to our words, and we invite that, we encourage that. Mike, one of the things you said there a moment ago about all the things that come because of the Lord's love for us is more success. And I know you well enough to know what you mean, but for our listeners' sakes, we're not putting out here a variant of the prosperity gospel. We are not for persons who happen to align with some of what we really struggle with in that particular, call it a gospel or a teaching. Success by God's measures is often different than success by man's measures. And so the success that you're talking about there is a greater ability, whether in much or in little, that we rejoice in all. To live as Christ, to die as gain. It's all, there's nothing more that leaves us out of that state of gladness of heart.
When I said that, I did not mean dollars in your pocket. Success by God's standards.
Well, that's awesome. Now we don't have to file like a retraction on the Sunday newspaper, Michael.
Can we talk about abiding a little bit more just on a practical level? Because sometimes you hear this word abide, and it's like, okay, I'm going to go sit in my living room and abide. Like, what does that even look like? I think what might be helpful is even just to lay out the foundation for starting that process of abiding, because there are certainly things for me that have gotten in the way from really hearing God and walking with Him. And I think one of those things for me is medicating. Like, it's painful when we're not doing well and God is drawing us toward Him. And as a 7 on the Enneagram, I just don't want to sit in discomfort. So I reach for things like food, like experiences, like things that'll pull me away from having to feel what I'm feeling. And so what are some of those things for you guys? Not that you have to air all your dirty laundry on how you medicate your pain, but can you guys speak to that a little bit? Like, what gets in the way of abiding for you?
For me, it's definitely some of those things you mentioned, in addition to just the busyness, right? There's so many times where, as guys, well, I could go do this, go do that. I'm not great at just sitting and listening and reflecting. And so sometimes I will just chase after what's in front of me. And, well, I guess if this isn't working, let's go do this and sit here. And so I think for me personally, one thing I'm learning in this whole idea of abiding, and again, getting back to our topic, the yo-yo that we go through is listening. It's just really listening and taking some time to reflect. What's it like for you, Chris, Jamie?
I was laughing so hard when you said abide in the living room. Like, I could see one of your Facebook posts. Weekend challenge. Everybody go in your living room and just abide for 20 minutes.
The bag of chips and a remote. I can abide all day long.
I know that we're becoming Enneagram geeks on this podcast. Probably a lot of our listeners don't know the code for that, but a lot of people probably resonate with what McGreevy and Nehemiah were saying, that it's really hard to sit still. That's probably my biggest struggle, is I never want to sit still and never just be at peace. There's obviously growth in that space for anybody that feels that, and I am no exception. A couple of years ago, I went on this Camino de Santiago with my uncle. It was so hard just to be quiet for like an hour at a time. Oh my gosh, it's so difficult. That would be me. My version of abiding would be to slow it all down and listen.
Well, and I'll definitely confirm that as one of the 7s on here from that Enneagram thing, the guys that just love adventure and are very enthusiastic about anything. Take them, take a pick, anything. It's all great. Our tendency when we get into a bad space is to self-medicate by gluttony, any kind of gluttony, overdoing of anything, even good stuff, just too much of something. And the reason is because we're just kind of trying to numb out, escape, shut it down, and boy, oh boy, give me a laundry list of the things that I can find to distract myself with. I can even convince myself there, hey, it ain't a bad thing. It's a good thing, but I'm absolutely just trying to keep myself from acknowledging that my need is to stop and come away with the Lord. And I will say that's one of the many reasons that I found myself able to embrace and be thankful for my illness, is because it puts me flat on my face 2 to 3 times a day in treatments, and there ain't anything else to do except pray when I'm in that state. So it's an abiding time. It's not one that I chose. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But boy, I've reaped a lot of fruit for which I'm very thankful from being forced to be in just a quiet meditative state while my blood does some of the blood cleansing that it needs to do with this Lyme disease. And so I don't know what somebody else's thing is. I hope it's not a medical issue that forces them, but I don't believe there's anything that will take the place of getting away and being quiet. But then, remember that this passage I was reading is all about embracing and engaging in our toilsome labor. There's work to be done. There's life to be lived. And the abiding is to be a state of being, not just something we kind of turn on, turn off, jump into, jump out of. So that constant awareness, make my life a prayer to you, Lord. That sense of being in conversation with him all day long about whatever we are doing. That's a state of abiding. And I sure don't do it perfectly, but that's the direction.
Thanks for keeping it real, guys. It's awesome to walk through this stuff with you. I mean, especially just coming right off of a really tough season, but really after I hadn't listened in the right way, I finally started to see what it looked like to really abide and walk with God, and I'm still learning, but it's great to do that along with you guys. What about you? If you're listening right now, does your strength rise and fall with what you happen to accomplish today or this week or recently? What if all that was taken away? What if you didn't have any of it? Would you be the same man? Would you have the same value? Instead of running from what God is calling you to, reaching for something to make that pain go away or to distract you, what about sitting in it, listening, getting around some other guys that you trust and talking it out, sharing the stuff, being open about that journey, and then ultimately clinging to the rock, the unchanging faithfulness of the Lord.
Thank you for listening to the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. Visit efmlife.com to connect with us and others like you who are pursuing success in enterprise, family, and marriage.
And abiding.